I don't care what anybody says. You're never going to stop learning. So any of these guys that pat themselves on the back that know everything, they're just foolish because it's always changing.
You want to feel the difference. And when that rod tip is too stiff, that very subtle, different pull is indiscernible from those little taps.
People will go up, they don't see bass popping, they make a couple casts, they leave. But they don't take the time to try and figure out what's going on under the surface.
You know, we'll sit there, do 5 of those drifts and not catch one fish and just go. They'll just keep going to the next spot, Right. Not me, I'm staying there.
You know, you have that moment with all sorts of species of fish where you realize you are not the one that's got the upper hand in the fight, and I realized that very quickly. That fish, it took off, it dug my rod tip right into the water.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Salt Strong live stream and podcast. My name is Rich Natoli. I am the regular host of this show, normally joined by the lovely and talented Ed Gobo. But he is off tonight, and he's actually going to be off next week as well when we bring back the Salt Strong coaches and we do the coaches show. But tonight, man, this is going to be a good one. I want to, first of all, thank everyone for sticking by. We had a little bit of an audio issue going on, but hey, it's live. It's what happens. And when you have 2 content creators, you can usually get through it, and we got through it. I'm going to give Ken a lot of credit for fixing this one. So this one's going to be a really cool show. This is one of those guys that you wish that you were fishing next to all the time, because he has a track record of not only catching blackfish, but catching monsters. And as a matter of fact, he has the largest blackfish ever registered with the IGFA. It is the world record holder, and I'm going to bring him on right now, Mr. Ken Westerfeld. Ken, welcome to the stream. How you doing?
Thanks for having me, Rich. Really good. Great to be here.
I'm really excited. I get really excited when we have guys coming on to talk blackfish, and we've had some really good ones. We've had a lot of people talking blackfish. I mean, it's blackfish season, right?
Sure. Makes sense.
But we haven't had a world record holder on yet. And I was talking to Ed in the fall, and I said, we've got to reach out to Ken Westerfeld and see if he'll come on. I don't know if he'll want to or not, but we got to reach out to him. And we decided, when it starts to slow down, what a great time to start reaching out to these record holders and see if they want to come on and just talk. It's not all hard lessons every time. It's just talking fishing. And we were talking about it. And then last week I said, we got to get him on now. And Ed is unfortunately unable to make it tonight. He was pretty disappointed. He wanted to kind of rub elbows with you tonight too, but
sorry, I had to miss him.
Well, he's got some work that he has to do tonight. So, but welcome to the stream. Before we get started, I wanted to give you a chance for those that don't know you and don't know where to find you online. I mean, you're all over the world of blackfish, not just blackfish, but saltwater fishing. Do you want to share any of the places where people can find you?
Well, thanks for the opportunity. So I have a YouTube channel. It's Ken Westerfeld Fishing, and it's been in existence it's been about 4 years now. I have not grown to the capacity that I would like to be at, and I'm hoping to put a lot more effort back into my channel this year. Last couple of years, I went through some big changes. I mean, we all went through big changes with the pandemic and, but in my case, we relocated from Queens, New York City, where I spent, 55 years of my life. Basically, I was on Long Island for a short period and returned to Queens again. So, for all intents and purposes, most of my life was spent in College Point, Queens as my home base. And it was pretty advantageous for fishing all of Long Island from one end to the other. And people overlook it, but there's a lot of great fishing opportunities right there in New York City in the 5 boroughs. And I basically call the Western Long Island Sound my home waters. So being here in Connecticut, I'm in a new environment, and it's baby steps again. not everybody is willing to take you by the hand and show you everything and give you all, their spots and so on. And I totally understand that. And I'm no stranger to work, and when it comes to fishing and finding the right places. So that's what I've been doing these last 2 seasons, putting in a lot of time and effort to learn the new terrain. And this place has some really great opportunities, not only when it comes to blackfish and certainly blackfish, because we have an April season, we have a July and August season, and we have the October-November season, mid-October to the end of November. It's pretty generous, I mean, I put in a fair amount of time chasing my favorite species and collecting my fillets, because we certainly love to eat blackfish in my house. And the great bycatch that comes with it, you get some occasional tasty sea bass and some porgies, and you never know. You just never. But we have, as I was telling you in our conversation last week, we have a great shot of weakfish here. We have outstanding striped bass fishing. It's year round. It's mind-blowing to me because, I spent my long stretches of the winter hiding out and keeping warm like most people. At some point, it comes that time when we hang it up for at least a good 2 months, if not 3. And so I'm not doing that anymore.
Right.
I try to get out, you can't go out and fish every day. Certainly it is winter, but on those days when the conditions happen to be right, you have to watch the weather forecasts and the tide charts and everything. And you pick those moments and try to cash in, and it's been working out pretty well for me so far. I've learned a lot of the Housatonic and the surrounding areas. It's only 26 minutes from my house, and to take it a step further east, I'm out of a yacht club in West Haven, which is on New Haven Harbor, and New Haven Harbor is home to the mouth of the Quinnipiac River. And the Quinnipiac is, I think, certainly Connecticut folks know about it, but the rest of the world, it's home to a pretty good striper population too. I think all these rivers in Connecticut that empty out into the Sound, and I haven't explored all of them yet. There's just really not enough time, but I think they all offer habitat to striped bass, and probably even a spawning environment, because you're talking about brackish outflows, But yes, further up east still would be the Connecticut River, and that is fabled for cow bass, more in, I'm sure that they're stacking up in April, but May and June is very popular in the mouth of the Connecticut River. And, guys I see posting and I hear and I talk to, and, some really significant fish, 50-pound, 60-pound fish at times, a lot of 30s, and great fishing, great fishing. Connecticut River is very diverse. There's catfish in there, big catfish. There's, pike. There's all the salt, freshwater species represented, and whatever you would imagine, running in and out of an estuary from the salt. It's all there, So yeah, the whole Connecticut shoreline is an interesting place. And it's funny because you won't hear too many people say, I'm going on vacation in Connecticut. I'm going fishing in Connecticut. I'm going on a charter in Connecticut. You don't hear people in other locations talk that way much, but maybe they should.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of great opportunities here. And certainly when you go up east and, you know, you have Niantic, New London, the Thames River. There's bass in there too. That is right a stone's throw from Fisher's Island in front of the race. You know, in eye shot of Montauk on a clear day, and within range of Block Island. Hang a left, you're in Rhodey. Hang a right, you can run down to the Connecticut River. You know, so it is a very diverse place to be located and have tremendous opportunities of almost every kind imaginable, you know, and within this northeastern Atlantic fishery, basically all of the options are represented.
It's funny, as a coach, we have a lot of members up in New York, Connecticut area, and boy, they'll ask a question of me, you know, what do you think about this river? I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish that river was here. That is you got to try there. And they're like, well, what about this other? I'm like, yeah, go to that other river. Look right here, here, and here. Look at all these spots, and it's one of those places that it kind of reminds me. The sound reminds me of the Chesapeake, in that there are so many rivers and tributaries running into it that it just opens up such a wide variety of different fish and species, and it really keeps you can stay on the water year round when you're up there. And you now are, and I'm now, you know, I'm one of those people too. I don't hang it up. I'm fishing every week, and I'm looking for those same weather windows that you're looking for up north.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and freshwater, people don't give it a lot of consideration, but the state of Connecticut does a fantastic job with that. We pay into a trout and salmon stamp on our license, and their stocking program is phenomenal. They provide kokanee and Atlantic salmon. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
You know, I caught an 8-pound brown trout last February. That was like my personal best in a local body of water, and pretty exciting, you know, very enjoyable. The trout, they stock quite repeatedly, and I'd say the fish are numerous, and it makes for great action. It makes for great action and great quality fish. So it's been really enjoyable getting acquainted with all of it. And I do have a few good friends locally who have been giving me clues and offering some info that has been useful to me. You know,
it's always important to have that network, right? It's always important to help each other out, because things change so quickly. Spots, you know, the fish move so often, you know, in the middle of the day. So it's nice to know, hey, you know what? They're not holding in this type of spot. You need to check this area. You know, it's something that looks like this, and here's what I was doing, and here's, you know, the wind was on this bank, and that's where they were, or they were in the wind protected side. All that stuff is so important.
Oh yeah, and you know, the area throughout, you know, all those different locations that I went down the list there, there is a good, healthy amount of local bait and tackle shops with, you know, very knowledgeable proprietors and inventories that are well tailored to these local fisheries. You know, these people know what's going on, and you know, they're very helpful, and it pays to get to know them and get some tips from them too, you know, and they are happy to give you some tips because they want you to come back and be a repeat customer, you know, so they want to help their customers out, make you happy, and Yeah, one hand washes the other kind of deal, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah.
Now, so you're up there in a great area for fishing year round.
Hmm.
But let's go on to the blackfish. When you're out trophy hunting and you're going for world records, state records, women's records, all these records that are happening on your charters, you're heading down to Maryland. And one of the questions I had is, why are you doing that? I know why I would do that. I want to see if our answers would line up.
Okay. So I had gone down to fish Ocean City on the Morning Star with Captain Monty Hawkins the first time. I believe it was February 2011 was my first experience. And I had spoken to a couple guys who were running down there and fishing with him. And, at the time, the Saltwater Northeast website was a big thing. It was the popular place to meet fellow fishermen online and BS and spend the winter, arguing about the various things.
Right.
But as robust and entertaining as all of that was, um, there were some guys who maybe made the mistake of posting a good handful of large size blackfish, teen size fish mostly, and that's honestly that is the open door that led me to Ocean City. But there's another chapter of the story uh, that came before that, which was in College Point, my hometown of College Point, Queens. We had Fisherman Depot, who established his business in the early 2000s there. And upon him opening his doors, I became, of course, a regular customer, a local customer. I was already deep into it, OCD by that time.
Right.
And yeah, I would frequent the shop quite a bit. And he started this little side business within that he called bookfishingtrips.com. And he would book blocks of charters with certain charter captains. And then he would set these trips up for his local customers. And he kept embellishing on that program. He went out and bought a passenger van and provided transportation, even a trailer for everybody's 150 quart coolers and so on. But yeah, he was doing a lot of interesting charter trips, and he was booking Ed and Cindy Malloy in Atlantic City in those days, the Miss AC and the Captain Colette. They ran two charter boats, one of which was a 70-foot party boat, and the other was probably like a 45-foot 10-pack charter / dive boat, because in the warmer months they ran dive charters, so they really knew these pieces of bottom like intimate, like the back of their hands. And in Victor's charters going down there, there was this one guy, Sam, Big Sam, and he was like one of the Tautog trophy hunting OGs as far as I'm concerned. And during that series of trips, Victor was like booking them for several years in a row, almost every weekend of the season. And their season ran over the winter, where New York season closed and things like this, so it was convenient to jump on those trips. It gave you an opportunity to get out when otherwise you might not, so Big Sam landed a 21-pounder on one of those trips, and that was the eye opener. That was the wake up call. That began to spark my interest and imagination as to what would be possible, right? And it was in 1998 that Anthony Monica caught his world record fish on the North Star in Ocean City, New Jersey.
Right.
And caught that on 30-pound mono, right? So he's still got the 30-pound men's mono line class record. 25-pound fish. And I remember that article being written and coming out in the Fisherman magazine and discussing it with one of my then very close fishing partners and saying, imagine what that must be like. Imagine catching that fish, because I was already doing a lot of tog fishing then in the Sound. The Sound was great. It was on fire. I mean, we weren't even using braid yet. We were using 30, 40-pound mono and Virginia hooks straight out of the package and cut green crabs and catching 30 keepers a day, like, per person. Like, we were keeping that many, of course, just saying that we were catching them, we were throwing back a lot of fish. We were catching a lot of fish. And that changed. That changed sooner, much sooner than I would have liked it to, we saw those fish kind of like dwindle and disappear really quickly. And my opinion was, potting had a lot to do with that. But I digress. That's another story.
We could do a whole episode on that.
Yeah. So getting back to Atlantic City, it was prolific. There were teen-sized fish down there, and you weren't guaranteed to catch one, but they were numerous enough that you felt like you had a great shot. And certainly getting your fillets was no issue at all. On any day with fair enough weather, you could really go down there and bang on the fish. It was impressive fishing, So we started heading south with our white crabs, because white crabs were first used in Sheepshead Bay by commercial rod and reel anglers. I mean, I don't know, who and where would try to take the credit for that, but that's a fact, I began fishing commercial rod and reel out of Howard Beach, New York, not far from Sheepshead Bay. And my captain in those days was regularly using white crabs, and then when you went on the party boats in Sheepshead Bay, those crabs were there, they were there, and it was obvious what kind of difference those crabs made, so it was quick and easy to become addicted to that type of fishing, and particularly using that bait. And finding out that, it was that period of December and January when those crabs would molt and they would get just right, they'd be primo. Like a striper cannot say no to a live herring. Blackfish cannot say no to a shedder white crab.
Right.
It's just the fact, So it was that type of thing. And guys started to hear about these southern fisheries with these, potential giant fish. And they had all this reef building going on, down south, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia. I don't think as many people ventured quite as far south as Virginia to go fish. There wasn't as many charter options. And one very important element of who you would choose to fish with down south was that they had to know how to double anchor.
Yep.
Double anchoring was was the gold standard for tog fishermen. I mean, that's how we did it in Sheepshead Bay and other locations, around New York City and Long Island, the Sound, for example. And I digress on that because out east, eastern Long Island, you don't see as many boats doing the double anchor setup out there, but that's another story. That's, the race and the tides out there. It's just not even safe to think
Right.
about a double anchor setup in a lot of those locations, but, and they still have abundant enough fish out there that, they're catching them even on one anchor, and, the boat can swing and you'll still catch them,
Right.
But going down south, it's most often and much about wreck fishing, and to wreck fish effectively, it should be done on 2 anchors. And this is long before the advent of Rodan and Minn Kota and Spot Lock. All right. So that we could do a whole show on that subject alone. But
we've got a lot of people that have a lot of strong opinions about the spot lock and the quote unquote cheat code for tog nowadays, and what it's actually doing to the fishery, because everybody you used to have, like, I could say I've done a lot of offshore anchoring, and we used to double anchor, and I was terrible at it, and I did it a lot. Now, in my defense, I was hand lining these anchors. We didn't have winches, and it was 100 feet of water. 2 anchors on a 25-foot boat is difficult, but man, I used to almost cry when one anchor wasn't right, and it's like, oh my God, I got to pick this thing up and we got to swing it, another 30 yards up. That was the worst, but it is definitely an art. And the 2 guys down in Ocean City, Maryland, are absolutely masters at it. I mean, we have 2 of the most well-known captains for blackfish in Monty Hawkins and Kane Bounds are probably 2 of the best out there. We've got a lot of really good ones in New Jersey too. But
Monty is the OG down there. I mean, he's been doing it the longest, and with the Ocean City Reef Foundation, which he is such a big part of and so wildly active. I mean, he is the guy that is responsible for laying a great amount of the bottom that exists down there, and he's always adding to it, so nothing but props for Monty. As far as I'm concerned, he's probably the #1 head boat for tog on the East Coast. And conversely, on the smaller charter end, then my heart belongs to Kane,
right.
But they're both stellar at what they do. They are professional. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So let's talk about, not necessarily about Captain Bounds, but that's the boat that you were on for your world record.
That's right.
And then last week, I didn't realize it was your charter. You were on for a pending world record for the women's. What is it women's overall or women's 30-pound?
So the sad part about that deal is, and I spoke to Zach at the IGFA on Thursday, there is no all tackle record specifically for women. So how that works is the all tackle world record is exactly what it sounds like.
Okay. So she's going against you for that.
It's like, well, there's no going against me. The fish doesn't come quite close enough, but
right.
It's like that movie, The Highlander. There can be only one. And
right.
Truth of the matter is that there are men and women around the world who hold all tackle world records. It's not dissected by sex. It's like you caught the biggest fish of its kind in recorded history. there you go. You know, man or woman, that's it. You know, that record is yours until it's defeated. And you know, Anthony Monica had the world record tautog for 17 years before I caught my fish. He died with that record under his belt. God bless him. You know. Yep. So he had it 1998 until January 2nd, 2015. Yeah. So far it's been a little over 8 years now, and no challenger yet. I still get to sit in the number one chair, and you won't hear me complain about it.
No.
It's been a wild ride, you know. It's been a blessing. It's been a great blessing. I mean, I say it all the time. God wanted me to have a fish, you know, and that's the only two ways about it. And there are so many little nuances to that story that I could interject.
Well, let's talk about that fish. Let's break it down into a couple of little parts, because I know there's already a question in there that I want to bring up in a minute from Nick Devereaux. But before we get into what you're using for your terminal tackle, let's just kind of go through when you're heading down there and you're truly going out looking for the monster tog. What is the rod and the reel and the line that you're typically using on your primary setup?
So I really don't change it much. I caught that fish on, you know, what I call Excalibur, or Hammer of the Gods, which is my CalStar 800L graphiter, and that one had been cut down to 7'3", you know, to make the tape right on it, and I love it. I love that rod. And I didn't have that one made. I bought it from an old friend of mine, and I loved it from day one, actually. And it really was seamless growing into that rod, you know. I did swap reels a couple of times on the day of catching the record. I was swapping back and forth between a pair of Thorium 14s that I was fishing, and in those days especially, I was fishing hard. I was fishing a lot. I was fishing on the commercial crew and got out whenever the weather allowed, and I was fishing with friends, and I was fishing on my own boat. Yeah, so yeah, there was a lot of fishing going on.
Well, and what reel are you using now then?
Well,
you're not still using the Thorium.
This trip, I actually had to switch back to one of them because it's been a little while since I had my Ancient Mariner Phantom Jigger serviced, and that's been my go-to reel like for the last 5-6 years since I've gotten it. I really like that reel. He had a previous model that I fished for a couple of years, and then he came up with this model, and I really like this one. I really
Phantom
it's a Phantom Jigger from Ancient Mariner,
which is a great value reel when you compare it to the others.
That's really what it comes down to. And since I know Spiro and he's a personal friend, I get really good attention if I need anything done. Usually I can run right to his house and he'll take care of me on the spot in minutes, you know. But now we live quite a bit further apart since I moved, so I see him a little less frequently. So that's what happened, you know. It's been a while since I had it cleaned out and lubed, and I had a little issue, and I just put it on the shelf until I see him, and I was like, okay, I got to go back to the old Thorium, which I don't mind, you know. I mean, I fish those reels hard, but they're still going, you know. So
You can't
Yeah,
argue with that.
yeah. And I caught a nice 15 pounder and a 13 pounder last week on that outfit, and they gave me a good tussle. You know, it was nice. Snafu rig. You know, fishing old school. I like the snafu. A lot of people don't like the snafu, but the snafu for me, when I really started fishing it in earnest, you know, those were the heydays, man. Like the fish just bit like crazy. We had incredible days of tog fishing, and it wasn't a line shy thing ever. You know, there was just such an abundance of fish, I think, in those times. And they didn't show a lot of line shyness or, you know, apprehension to bite or whatever, for whatever reason. I just believe that it was a much stronger population of fish. But yeah, so I still like to fish the snafu because so many of my largest blackfish I've caught on a whole white crab. I like to fish a crab whole. I like to have 2 hooks in a whole crab, crack the top shell. I always take the claws off. That's my thing. And I'll remove the legs, you know, if I think there's a good reason to. Like, if you drop down and the tide is running hard and you have legs on your crab, well, there's a good chance it's going to spin in the tide, and that's going to twist your leaders up and cause all kinds of problems. You don't want that. So in that case, you tailor your bait to meet the conditions.
Right.
And, you know, a lot of guys really love the slider rig, and the slider rig totally has its time and place. I think it certainly works better in a running current, you know, and it's certainly better for those times when the fish are picky, apprehensive, scratchy, lethargic. Yeah, there are those times where the fish just don't want to feel any weight at all. They don't want to see any additional leader or whatever it is, but I find that scaling the presentation down is more likely to get you bites when things are like that, you know.
Right.
And in that winter fishing, when the water really gets the chill on, and, you know, the latter part of January and February and maybe even the month of March. March has been closed down for a while, and, you know, in New York, and all right, I think it's open in Maryland. I think Jersey's closed in March, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so March is kind of a closed month these days, but, you know, I caught my first 10-pound blackfish in the month of March with my commercial captain back in the day. So,
You know, it's a theme that we have sometimes in the past on the show, where we're talking about seasons and everyone's saying, well, there's no fish there at that point. And I made the argument, and we were specifically talking about fluke this
right.
past year with the change of the seasons. People are like, why do you want it to start earlier? There's no fish there. That's why it opens at the end of May. And I said, no, that is not why it opens at the end of May. Fish early May, and you will find out. You will be catching them all over the place. And I think that's the same thing with most species. You know, people think striped bass aren't out there in the winter. Like in New Jersey, you can't target them. Well, they're there. You're just not allowed to target them. They're there year round. You know, a lot of these species are there year round, and tog is absolutely one of them. You know, people say, well, it shuts down, and it shuts down because captains need to finally pull their boats and get them prepped for the next year. That's why, you know, that's why it seems to shut down. They have to pull their boats.
Yep.
But yeah, I'm not surprised that you got, you know, a really large blackfish in March. Absolutely.
Oh, I'm not the only guy, and I'm certainly not the first, you know.
No.
I might be the last, though.
Yeah, you might be the last. So let me just show this. You answered part of this question. It's from Nick Devereaux. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the you answered the second part. So you like the snafu over the slider and the sweetheart. You did explain why. But do you ever use jigs?
Okay, so as I've mentioned numerous times, I cut my teeth in the Western Long Island Sound. So if you don't know the story, that's where jigging tog was born. Okay. There's a tackle shop up in New Rochelle called Hudson Park Bait and Tackle, and that's where John Knight originated his Title Tales blackfish jigs. He's the first one. He's the first one. Before him, there was nobody making a dedicated blackfish jig. Nobody. And as the story goes, the way I remember hearing it, and I've had conversations with John in the past, not in a long time, but I believe he had a couple of customers who were sharp dudes who would, be in the shop regularly. And I guess they were friends, and they must have let it slip out that they came up with this idea to use light jig heads in the shallows with Asian crabs.
Yeah.
As I mentioned earlier, and here's a great point on this subject, when I first started fishing for blackfish on my own boat in the Western Long Island Sound, I said that we were using 30-pound test mono or 40-pound mono and Virginia hooks straight out of the package and cut green crabs. And we were whacking the fish. There was never a problem finding and catching the fish. But I guess it was in the early 2000s, something changed. And it was getting harder and harder to catch your limit using that method. And this is around the time that the advent of tog jigging was occurring. The result was that the invasive Asian mitten crab species came to the North America in the scuppers of freighter ships and so on, much like the green crab did. But these Asian crabs were ferocious and were outcompeting every other shoreline species of crab. They were taking over, right? So evolution was occurring right before our eyes. The blackfish adapted to a new forage source, right? They were staying in the shallows for longer periods in spite of temperature changes because this became their food source. That's how they were making a living, right? They adapted to eat these crabs. That's why we weren't catching the fish on the usual locations where we had always found them in abundance before. They were holding tighter to the shoreline. And that's really how we put a terrible hurting on them in the Sound, because now we located them and we learned the secret. It was wildly effective. And in those days, for example, Rich Tenrero from R&G Bait and Tackle became Northeast Angling on the internet, the cable TV show for a while. Him and Andy Lacasio, his partner on that. These guys were taking out charters and catching double-digit blackfish on every trip, man. I mean, it was like prolific. It was wild fishing, and it was shallow, man. I'm talking 10 feet of water. The type of water that most charter boats wouldn't feel comfortable fishing in, taking customers.
Right.
But these guys were fishing these shallow pieces in the Sound, man, and they were whacking them. you know? And once that secret got out, everybody was doing it, you know, including myself, right? So I was having a ball with it, and I was beginning my tenure as a commercial rod and reeler with my dear friend Ed Parker on the South Shore. You know, he was a licensed guy, and I got on his crew, and it was in about 2009 that one day I walked onto Ed's boat with my jig heads and a spinning rod, and he's like, "What the hell you gonna do with that?" Don't worry about it, Ed. And I proceeded to whack the fish like he could hardly even catch a fish. And I was just smacking them right in front of him. And the funny part of that is I had to do that maybe a half dozen times for him to put any merit in what I was doing, you know.
Of course.
Yep. But it unlocked the secret, you know, the whole light tackle tog approach was in full swing, man, you know. But yeah, it was born in the Western Sound, where I come from, you know, where I learned to fish for all intents and purposes. And I brought it to the ocean, and I'm not the only one. I'm certain of that, but I certainly brought it to the ocean, you know, amongst my own friends, and friends that I had met on the North Fork of Long Island, you know, going out to Fisher's Island and Plum Gut and, you know, Plum Island and the surrounding areas, Connecticut, and the North Fork. I was fishing with a bunch of guys that I began to become well acquainted with in 2008 and moving forward. One of those was John Halkias, who we mentioned. He's been on here a couple of times, right? So I saw him in the intro there. Yeah, so John never saw a jig before he saw me with fish a jig, and it blew his mind. You know, he was trying to wrap his head around it, and he couldn't for quite a while, you know. It definitely took some repetition for him to get it. But once he got it, you know, he far prefers the jigging over regular conventional fishing. And, you know, he's making his little niche out of that. You know, that's what he does for his customers. Skinner likes to jig, and he's got his bottom sweeper jigs, and, you know, Halk and all those guys. You know, I fish with Sweeney all the time here in Connecticut, and, you know, that's his luck. He's like, I don't even want to fish a conventional rod, Ken. You know, I don't even want to do that. Well, you know what? Here in Connecticut in the shallows, that's fine. You know, it's all about the jigging, you know. You don't have to ever touch a conventional rod if you don't want to, you know, unless you're going to go out and fish some deep spots with some real current. But yeah, that's the kind of fishing that these guys prefer. They're most comfortable with. And I totally understand it. You know, it matches the tackle to the majority of fish that we catch.
Right.
You know?
But
the majority,
it doesn't necessarily work as well. Are you saying it doesn't necessarily work as well when you're out 80 to 100 feet?
I think there's a time and place for everything. Yeah. And I think that, you know, the jig has its days, like, or moments. Maybe saying days is the wrong explanation. So I think of it in terms like this. I want to go on a fishing trip. And do I want to catch fish for 1 hour of the trip, or do I want to catch fish throughout the entire trip? You know? And you can, at times, catch fish throughout the entire trip if you're paying attention to the conditions that are present in the moment. And you have to adapt your presentation to those conditions. And you can almost continuously catch fish throughout an entire outing if you are observing and you make those changes, sometimes quick
Right.
switches. But and the reason, I say this and I can define it more clearly is that let's just say what time the tide is. Like, let's say outgoing tide begins at 9 a.m., right? You have at least 6 hours of outgoing tide. Before that tide gets down all the way to the bottom, it's going to slack up, right? Point being, the speed and strength of the tidal current will not be consistently the same throughout the entire tide.
Right.
The speed and strength of the water changes. At one point it's going to be peak current, and it works its way up to that, and then it drops back down, right? So as long as you're adjusting your bait presentation to the strength of the current, you can keep that bait in the strike zone, and you can keep those fish feeding. Sometimes a jig is very advantageous. I think of a jig as a gimmick. It's a tool to get bites when you can't get bites. I prefer to what I call fish the right way, which is, look, if you want to catch a big blackfish, you want to be able to put the heat on that fish. You have to stop that fish from getting back into a wreck or rocks or whatever you're fishing on top of. But let's face it, most of the time you're going to get the bites that you're looking for. You're going to be on top of some pretty gnarly stuff, right? Well, that's where those fish live. And we all know they use their home against you. They will bust you off left and right, get you hung up, make a monkey out of you every chance you give them, So you want to be able to use that conventional outfit because you want to put the heat on those fish. You want to put the leverage on them. You want to have a power advantage over those fish. And that's how you land them, to play around with light tackle. It's fun, it's sporty, but you do not have the power advantage. They will manhandle you.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's that's a very good answer for it. I like fishing the jigs, but when I'm offshore, I tend to not even bring a jig, even though it could produce at certain times. I'll just bring 2 rods and fish the rigs and just kind of power through that slow time.
Yeah.
Because there's so many times where you just feel that the jig lifting up and moving. And I don't know. Do you agree with this? You want that bait to be motionless on the bottom when you're out there hunting for the big ones?
In deep water, cold conditions, when things are on the lethargic side.
Yeah, I'm talking winter, like right now. You would,
yeah.
There's the I don't know if you're familiar with Frank Mahalik, but he calls it quick fishing, and that's where you're moving it. But that's the warmer weather months where you're actually jigging your baits and moving them. But once it gets cold, he has stated he keeps that as motionless as possible. The only movement on that bait on the bottom is the current just moving it side to side.
Again, and I for the most part, yes, I agree with that. But I don't think that you can pigeonhole. I approach every day, every trip, every part of the tide. Like I said, it's being continuously observant, having your eyes and ears open and carefully watching, what's going on, the clarity of the water, the speed of the water, the temperature of the water. Rain, snow can stain up water, wind stains up water. You go fishing after a terrible east blow and fish might not bite for days sometimes after that, so every day is different, and you have to take into consideration what happened the day before, what happened 3 days before. You always have to be looking at the elements And you can't just approach a day of fishing and, you're planning your fishing trip for Friday and you're thinking about it on Monday and you're going to say, yeah, man, I'm going to drop down those jigs. I'm going to whack them, Nah, because, all right, if you know the location that you're fishing and you know the depth and you know what the current's going to be like and you know the water's going to be clean, sure, you can drop down jigs and you'll whack them.
Well, as long as it all works out that way.
Right.
As we all
Right.
know, it's very rarely what you think it's going to be when you get there.
Yeah. So it's a combination of everything, and it's a combination of, analyzing all the data. You have to analyze all the data,
Yeah.
and then you have to come up with what you believe is going to be the ticket, the solution to getting those fish to bite.
Right.
Getting the bites, that's, job one.
Yeah, that's the most important thing. You got to start with the bite. I want to make sure we get through some of these questions. Here's one. They've been talking about it in the chat a little bit from Pete Ranieri, up your way, actually. Catching in the deep water. I know you have a lot of experience with this. Does it help to prevent their guts from coming out if you reel slower? And if it does happen, are they pretty well toast? Are you keeping them, or do you think they can survive a release?
Well, again, there's no simple answer to this. The basic answer is yes, of course, reel slower, because what kills the fish, it's the bends, which would kill you or me. You're coming up through 3 atmospheres of pressure. And, even if you're not a diver, I'm sure you've heard something about it or saw something on television or spoke to friends who are into diving. You have to do your ascension very slowly and in increments to decompress every atmosphere of pressure, right? So there are times when you might only have like 15 minutes on the bottom and you'll spend another 20 to 30 minutes just getting back up to the surface, right? So depends on the depth of the dive and all of that, but it's the same, we're all biological living creatures and our cells are affected the same way, and we all require oxygen in our blood and things like this, right? So fish's gills takes oxygen out of the water and oxygenates their blood. We do it through our lungs and so on, but those gases expand, right? And the gases change from oxygen to carbon dioxide, right?
Yep.
And what becomes dangerous in our lungs and in our bloodstream. And it's biologically kind of the same for the fish too. So yes, slowing down your cranking, your retrieval on the fish will potentially help prolong its life.
Right.
And that doesn't guarantee it will, in the winter, you're also going through tremendous temperature changes, right? So again, the thermocline on the bottom keeps it comfortable for the fish down there, right? But the surface temp could be considerably less, so they could go into temperature shock.
Right.
They're faced not only with the atmospheric changes, but they're faced with the temperature changes, and they're cold-blooded, right? We're warm-blooded. They're cold-blooded. So their entire life cycle is dedicated by the temperature of the water that's surrounding them. Temperature of the water tells them when to spawn, when to feed, when to migrate. Anything a fish knows how to do, it's their instinct and their body controls telling them to do it, right?
Right.
It's not like they're contemplating and having long logical discussions and no, their life cycle is dictated by natural instinct. So, yeah, atmospheric changes, temperature changes, that's part of what kills these fish. Venting tools. Now, it works on some species down south, but I don't think there's been any real studies conducted on tautog up here in the Northeast, and we touched on this in our conversation last week. So the deep water bite, I hate to say it, but it's a fact of the matter. It's detrimental to the fish. So the fish that you harvest off the bottom, you should retain and eat them, because the truth is their potential survival rate after release is not very good at all. I would say less than 5% probability that they will survive. Blackfish fight hard to begin with. And in the deep water, man, you see them come up severely damaged, I mean, not only does their swim bladder expand, but they will blow their intestines out of their anus and they will be shredded, If your intestines were shredded and hanging out of your butt, you wouldn't walk down the street and go home and go to sleep and wake up the next day feeling fine, Well, it's the same for the fish. It's just kind of like common sense. This is anatomy 101. This is, simple biological facts. You see, their guts blown and damaged, shredded. How could you expect that fish to survive in that condition, And the other thing is, there's two other things. And number one, you bring that fish up and, the air bladder expands, but you see its eyes bulging out of its head, another clear sign of the bends. Atmospheric pressure changes. And I don't know if they right themselves from that. You can put those fish in a live well and they can stabilize, but then again, some of them never come back. Now, I can comment on this because I'd been a part of a commercial rod and reel crew for so long, right? And our catch gets kept alive and it gets sold to the Asian live market. And if those fish die, they're worth a fraction of what they're worth alive. Nobody wants them dead. They want them alive, So keeping them alive is paramount.
Right.
Commercial fishermen in general, and I can say this is definitely true for the guy who I fished with, he doesn't like to go to those deeper drops and commercial fish for that exact reason. The survival rate for those fish is much lower. You don't want to sell fish to a place and have them say, hey, 4 of my fish died, 5 of my fish died, you have to give me credit, things like this. And that's a reality,
That's a great answer. I mean, you're giving, so the guy with the money at stake is saying, I don't really want to go there because, in answer to you, Pete, I'm not going to make money. I'm going to be giving money back when I sell these fish.
Killing
and they're dead the next
for nothing, in that respect. And many times, he wanted to make his money, and many times we retain large fish.
Yeah.
And more often than not, and he repeated to me time and time again, the big ones just never make it, man. They just never make it. I came out to the pen this morning. The buyer was coming to the dock. We were going to weigh him up. The big one was floating. It's floating. It's floating. It's dead. They expire. They expire. And the big ones apparently are more susceptible and delicate than the smaller fish for some reason. I don't know if it's because they're older and wiser and they have a heart attack or they fight harder or whatever it is. But they're just more susceptible. And and don't survive, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, the winter fishing, you know, it's tough for that reason. And when you go out to a deep piece and you take X amount of fish, I almost feel like, you know, the right thing to do is there should honestly be no throwing back, because the survival rate for those fish is really slim, you know. Guys want to throw back their DD and feel like they did a good thing. Again, like with most people or mammals, or I think every species of animal, bird, reptile, fish, whatever, we have the age where we're, you know, in our peak, in our prime, where we're childbearing years, right?
Yeah.
And then we go beyond that. We become grandparents. We're not contributing to the gene pool anymore, right? I think that in the case of tautog, you're probably talking like 4 or 5 pound fish up to maybe 10, 12 pound fish are probably your largest contributors to the spawn.
They're the prime stock out there.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think once they get much larger and older than that, they probably stop, you know, contributing to the recruitment a whole lot, you know, at that point. So, yeah, that's another thing to think about.
It'd be interesting to see some studies on that. I don't think there are enough on tog, enough studies. I mean, striped bass is studied, I mean, almost excessively, I think. And then there's very little done on other species like fluke and blackfish. It would be nice if they would do that. So we're at an hour. I want to just make sure I get at least this other question up. From Philip Welsh, what size hooks for that? Let's go more general instead of for the snafu. What size hooks are you generally using, and what brand and what style hook are you using when you're out there?
I caught the world record on 4.0 Gamakatsu octopus hooks. They were actually red in color. I don't think that makes any difference at all. It's just
Right.
a fact of the matter. But you know, I've always fished gammies and 4.0s. I tend to favor 5.0s today, and there are times when I'm bold enough to fish a 6.0 even, you know, where I feel like the baits are going to be big. I fish hooks, like I choose hook sizes to match the baits that I'm fishing, you
Right.
know. Like if I'm fishing a little Asian crab, then I'm going to fish a light little jig most of the time, right? And if I'm not going to fish a jig, well, you still need to fish a small hook because it's a
Yes.
small bait. And you don't want a lot of hook point swinging around in rough pieces of bottom it's sure to grab something, right?
Right.
You don't want to hang your stuff up and keep breaking off and retying over and over and over all day. You know, that frustrates people. I know that for a fact because I've been there. But yeah, I choose my hook sizes or jig sizes in reference to the size of the baits that I'm generally fishing, you know.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I'll say, as a non-world record holder and somebody who's never gotten close, I'm fishing 4 to 6, and I use the 6s for those really big white leggers if I'm going to do a whole one.
Oh yeah.
But otherwise, I'm using typically. Actually, I think I use 5/0 most often, and
Right.
I also fish a whole. People always tell me, "Well, cut them," and I don't always cut the crabs in half and go half and half. I usually do at least. Now I use the slider rig mainly, or I at least start with the slider rig, and then I'll switch over to a sweetheart sometimes. But I am typically going 2 whole crabs, and I don't do all the like cut the corners off and all. I literally just rip off the claws. I leave the legs, hook them through the back, and then I smash the shell, and that's it. And then I put them. I like having them with the legs on. Some people like them nice and clean, and they think that it, you know, some of the things that they say is, well, it'll keep it from getting pulled off the hook. I don't know. I could be wrong. I just think if it's a big enough fish, which is what I want, it's going to get the whole thing. It's not going to take a leg and disappear. You
Yeah,
know,
seeing the whole crab with the legs on, it's a natural presentation. I mean, that's what they'd be foraging for on any given
right.
day. You know, that's what they're looking to eat, right? So, um, I don't disagree with you at all. I mean, I always preferred fishing a whole crab. I love fishing whole big crabs. You know, when I feel pretty confidently that the fish are going to eat them.
Right.
I start out fishing that way a lot of times, but like I say, you know, it's also relevant to the current conditions.
Yes.
If I have a lot of tide and I feel like that, you know, leaving the legs on is going to make it spin or whatever, then you know you don't want that happening either, because you know, if it looks unnatural, you're not going to get the bites. You know, so that's always something you need to think about. But
Right.
you know, I prefer a whole crab whenever possible. Yep.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
was called lazy once because I was throwing whole crabs on. I was like, I'm not being lazy.
Were
I
you
just
getting the
like the whole crab.
bites? Were you getting the bites?
Actually, yes, I was. Now, the last trip I was out, I was actually out with Nick, Devereaux, and Thad Drummond that are in the chat right now. They both outfished me, and I think they were using halves at various times. And I was using a half on one slider and a hole on the other, and I couldn't figure out which one was getting the most fish. But they definitely outfished me, especially Nick, who I was lucky enough to stand next to and watch and watch close up.
When you fish pieces, right? I mean, the juice is pouring out of the bait. The guts are exposed. The guts
Yep.
are chumming the fish in. That gets you the quick bites. It'll get
Yep.
you the quick bites. You know, but when there's tide, those baits wash out more quickly too, you know. And I'm always of the mindset, you know, big bait, big fish. um, I always want to offer them a substantial meal. I'm
Right.
always trying to attract a larger specimen. I've caught enough little ones. I don't care too much about the action. I will wait them out for a bigger bite any day,
Right.
any time possible, you know. Yeah, sometimes you just want to see if they're there, you know. The common method to fishing a jig is cut pieces, of course, you know. But in the event that I'm fishing like Asian crabs, you know, you can put an Asian crab down and not crack it and still get bit, you know. That Asian crab is still alive on the hook, it's moving around and stuff, you
Yep.
know. Sometimes just the motion of that bait and the natural look of it, you know, gets the fish hot and excited, and they come running right over,
Yeah.
even without any juice flowing in the current, you know.
I guess the moral of the story is experiment. Be willing to try the different things. I'd like that you're saying you don't need the little guys, so you're going to look for the big fish first.
Listen, they're visual daytime hunters. They don't feed
Yep.
at night, you know, so we know
Right.
that they're visual hunters as well. You know, definitely having the scent permeating in the current does a lot to attract them. There's no question about that. But, you know, they are at their basic a visual sight hunter, right? So you give them something to look at, you give them something that looks natural, something that they're not going to feel too wary about. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I will make one correction before I wrap this up. Nick did say he was fishing single hole crabs that day. So
Ah,
we were fishing the same thing. He just outfished me. He humbled me. Tad humbled me. Nick at one point had like nothing. It was getting outfished by multiple people. And he turned to me and he said, "Don't sleep on me, Rich." Because I had said, "Man, the back of the boat's not doing well." He said, "Don't sleep on me." He came back and high hook for the day. So congrats
all
again, Nick, on that one. It was a
right.
humbling day for me. Blackfish will humble you quick, and they got me that day. I ended
Yeah.
up with keepers, but or maybe it's only one, but yeah, it
Oh,
was one of those days.
I've had my days where have confounded me too. You know,
Yeah,
we all have good days and bad days, and
that's what makes them fun.
yeah. Oh,
You
yeah.
know, it's not
Yeah.
always dropping real. It's not always dropping real, but I'll tell you what, that day was a good day. Just watching everyone around me. There were, people struggling like me, and then there were people just slamming them. It
Well,
was
I'll tell you what, you know, people ask me about the charters that I go on, of course, and oh, what about this charter? What about that charter? And I'm always getting invited on charters. And if I had to tell you one thing that really, got me in the zone, is that I fished in the New York Bight when it was at its best, when it was in its heyday, when it was absolutely prolific. And I fished in the New York Bight much closer to the present tense, where the fishing's really hard. It's really tough. And you got to make every bite count. And, every bite that starts out as the little
scratch,
and you have to work that up, and you have to put a fish in the barrel, that is what got me tuned in. That is, it's not those days when it's an all-out rabid dog bite,
right?
It's savage and the fish are committing suicide, and eating the propeller off the back of the boat, eating the bottom paint off of the boat or anything like that. It's those days where you really have to focus. You really have to concentrate to, take any fillets home, or, put live fish in your friend's barrel so he can cover the expenses of the trip. You know what I mean? So, it's that kind of fishing that I think really built my experience above anything else.
That's good news, because that's what a lot of people are going through. New Jersey this entire season has been a scratch bite and just a grind. I mean, a grind on the best boats with the best captains, people on their own boats with spot locks. It's been a grind. Now, I'm not saying people aren't limiting. People are limiting.
Yeah.
But a lot more are really grinding out to barely limit, or to get their one or two. And it's just, hey, that's blackfish for you.
Listen, I marvel at technology, and I think that a spot lock is such a cool piece of equipment. It's pricey. It's out of my price range right now. It's a nice thing to have. I like to fluke fish, right? So that can correct your fluke drift or give you a fluke drift when you don't have one.
Right.
It's a game changer, but it makes a wreck captain out of people with absolutely no seamanship skills at all. Talk about double anchoring a boat. Now anybody and their mom and their uncle and their cousin Francis can go out and be a wreck captain. And the truth of the matter is, these things are going to wipe blackfish from the face of this earth. And that is just a fact. And it's happening. It's happening. Not only them, it's the demand of the Asian live market. It's the price on their head. It's poaching. It's potting. It's roller gear. It's all of these things. There are so many factors contributing to the decline and the inevitable demise of these fish that we love so much. But I think maybe possibly the worst thing to happen to them is spot lock, in recent history.
I won't disagree. I won't disagree with that at all. We'll leave it at that, because Ken, we are planning to have a show to talk about Tautog and the state of the fishery a little bit later, in the winter, early spring, really before it starts to open up back all over the place. Maybe that would be a good time to invite you back on and hear your perspective.
I would be happy to join you anytime, Rich. Like I said, nobody ever has to twist my arm to talk about fishing. So
that's great. Me either. So with that, everybody, I want to thank everyone for tuning in, and just want to say, there were a lot of great people in the chat, a lot of chat going on. Nick Devereaux, James Flynn, Antonio Toscano, Pete Ranieri, KB 7771, Joe Billups. Man, there are too many for me to even mention. That's what happens when Ed's not here. Ed usually handles that kind of stuff. So everyone, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week. It's going to be a Salt Strong Coaches show. We're going to have multiple Salt Strong coaches from all through the Gulf, all the way up the East Coast. So bring any questions you have, because that's all it's about. We're not going to talk about any topics except for what you ask for. So with that said, everyone, thanks again. Get out there, get on the water, and get some tight lines.
Thanks, everybody, for hanging out.